Hi, Jade. Welcome to the Close Call Show. I'm super happy to have you here. Why don't we kick this off? And why don't you give me a bit of an introduction about yourself? Tell me about your journey. How has your career been? What have been the pivotal decisions that you've made? So, yeah.
Sure. Hi. Firstly, thank you for having me, and great to be here. So, I guess just a little bit about my background. So, I'm one of the co-founders of Qflow or Qualis Flow. We're a construction technology company operating to help decarbonize new construction and refurbishment works. In terms of my background and kind of how we got here, so I actually started my career in working in the industry directly. So I was working as part of a large tier one contractor in the UK as part of their sustainability team. That was for a company called Skanska. Part of my role there really was to uh, help monitor and understand the different environmental risks that existed on the different sites. So it was a bit of a jack of all kind of role. So you were looking at anything from issues associated with noise and vibration on site and how that interfered with the local communities, all the way through to tracking the compliance and quantities associated with our waste removals and materials coming into the sites, embodied carbon, all that sort of thing. So it was a fantastic experience working on site on some of the larger infrastructure projects. And prior to that, my interest had always been in public realm, whether that was in sort of design or the general impact that the built world was having on the wider communities around us. And it was actually during this time, just prior to when I started working in construction itself, where I'd actually met my co-founder, Brittany. So we had both been working for a charity at the time, or volunteering rather for a charity at the time, and that was focused on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And so there was always a core focus there around, how can we look at these global goals around, eradicating poverty, hunger, clean water and sanitation, which was the focus area that we had. And off the back of this, program, which brought a bunch of people all together into New York, into the UN headquarters for a period of a few weeks, we wanted to set up a charity off the back of that experience. And so we set up a nonprofit focused on clean water sanitation, advocacy, campaigning, and raising education and awareness. And that's a fantastic experience, but definitely something which I think we quickly realized wasn't able to scale and have the impact on the wider world that we wanted. And so whilst we were still working in the sector, which was construction and design for both of us and our existing experiences, we sort of looked specifically to that space and said, okay, well, what impact can we have in this space? Construction is a remarkably inefficient industry, remarkably under-digitalized. It's a fantastic community with a million different problem solvers, all solving different problems every single day. But over time, you kind of layer up these different inefficiencies and it creates these really, really quite challenging problems. So we kind of looked at that space, and one of the key challenges we saw was specifically in capturing data on material and waste movements and understanding the impact of these spaces. So we kind of started thinking about that channel, and then we decided to kind of start Qflow off the back of that and try to tackle that very specific problem. So that was kind of the build up of how we got there. And yeah, hopefully gives you a little bit of background. Like it's always been a very impact driven focus for what we do, but very much born from the experiences we had firsthand in the industry.
Wow, this is fantastic. So let's start with Skanska. Isn't it one of the biggest construction companies in the UK or maybe the larger Europe? So did you have to do some sort of civil engineering to get into construction in the first place?
No, fortunately, I didn't. So my
Mhm.
sort of academic background was studying environmental science. So it was
Oh,
very
wow.
much,
Yeah.
yeah. So I sort of specialised more on the environmental regulation
Okay.
side. It was
Hmm.
a bit of a generalist role, and so a
Hmm.
lot of what I was specifically doing on site was working with different teams, be that
Hmm.
engineering,
Hmm.
QS, sort
Hmm.
of general construction management, to understand some of these key risks and basically try to help best manage them as much as we can. But you did always
Hmm.
feel like you're fighting fires a little bit. It is
Yeah.
just the nature of the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something comes up and you have to try and tackle it. And so
Yeah.
it's remarkably varied, but just spreading yourself super
Hmm.
thin.
Okay. The other question that comes to my mind is, first of all, starting a company is one of the hardest things. And starting a company in construction, which is one of the most under digitized, very, very slow to change, very slow to adopt digital tools, and also, unfortunately, male dominant. Why what was that hunger, or what was that tipping point for you to start a company in the construction space? Was it purely motivated by your passion towards impact and creating a change, or did you get used to the nature of the industry working with in this big corporate?
Yeah, it's a really funny one actually. It's a great question because it kind of came about by accident
Mm-hmm.
for us
Okay.
really, and I think I never saw myself from again from sort of going from studying to
Mm-hmm.
working in the sector and getting involved with social enterprise in between. I never necessarily saw myself as a direct pathway to say, right, I'm going to build a big business, a scalable business, going to be an entrepreneur, do that journey. Like that was never the end goal. It was never the kind of the core desire
Mm-hmm.
for me personally. But having an impact was. And
Mm-hmm.
so through my experience in social enterprise and charitable models and working in the sector directly, um, that was always very consistent. It was always
Mm-hmm.
a case of whatever I was spending my time on, I had to see that there was value at the end of it. Now, working with Skanska, working in the sector, gave me a really fantastic flavour of, you're working in an environment which is literally building the world around us. We all
Yeah.
interact with the built environment every day, and there's something that I found really beautiful about that, and being able to have your kind of stamp on it to make that as best a process and as clean a process as possible. But I think the frustration for me more widely came about because that change was incredibly slow.
Mm-hmm.
It is, it's a huge sector. When you're working for a large company in any sector, it does feel like you're trying to shift a ship sometimes. And obviously, that does take a lot of time. So I think my inclination around this was always, well, there's got to be a different way of doing things. And me and my co-founder Britt at the time thought, well, building Qflow and building a business and a model in this way was going to be the quickest and most effective way to have that
Mm-hmm.
impact. And that was actually the driving force behind this. So the business and scaling to where we are today was a kind of consequence out of that sort of core mission focus that has always been there from day one, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where are you today with Qualis Flow?
Where are we today?
Yeah.
In a very different place compared to 6 years ago. Well, it's funny because our sort of our formal 6 year anniversary
Mhm.
is coming up literally in a month's time. So
Wow.
it's an interesting point to reflect on actually. And right now we've gone from a position of sort of hacking together our initial MVP, putting that out into the world, learning, pivoting quite a few times in our journey in terms of where we're focusing the core product and where we're having that impact. And now today we're sort of scaled across different parts of the UK. We've got some sites in Australia and a few kicking off in the US now, which is very exciting. Team of over 50 people working collectively towards this journey. And so it's a very, there's been copious numbers of challenges along the way, of course, as every founder will know their journey. But it is a remarkably humbling experience to be here and to still be spending our time focused on this kind of common goal.
Super. And Jade, one of the reasons to have you on the show is you're one of those few founders, female founders in the construction tech space that's been super successful, that's had a journey that has broken through this industry, and that's managed to raise multiple rounds of financing and then really create impact, really sell to the industry players. So kudos to that. Super happy. I mean,
Thank you.
it's a huge industry, it's a tough industry, it's not a sexy industry, it's not one of those, oh, it's a productivity tool, let's hack at it. It's a challenging place to be in. So on that note, let's dive right into the challenge. You actually mentioned a lot of pivots that you've had in your journey. So what has been one of those pivotal decisive moment that you've had in your journey? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess just to quickly give some context in terms of
Mhm.
the product and where we are now, because I think one of the challenges I wanted to bring up was a very core decision we made in the early parts of our journey building this product that has sort of changed the evolution, so to speak, of our journey since then. So, as a product, what we do now is we have built a system which can help track all the materials, where those materials have come from, how much has arrived onto the construction or refurbishment sites, and all the waste movements that goes off. And we do that by tracking the documentation of all the delivery tickets, the delivery notes, waste transfer notes that accompany those movements. It seems like it's funny because when we first started, we initially didn't focus on that core problem. the problem that we're solving with this right now is very much one of this data is very difficult to get hold of. It's needed for a bunch of different things within construction in terms of transparency, audit trails, progress tracking, compliance tracking, understanding your embodied carbon, all those wonderful things. But initially, what we thought the core problem space was that we were tackling was this idea that trying to manage the overall environmental risk, so environmental specific in this sense, was problematic because you had all these different things you needed to collect data on, and they were dispersed in lots of different areas. So this comes back to, again, some of our previous experiences where we were looking to track noise and vibration and air quality and waste and material movements and carbon and water and electricity and all these other things. And so initially we thought with Qflow, we'll build a system that can help monitor and track all these different things and bring all of that together. And that was going to help.
Just a note there. So,
Sure.
you know, when people hear the word environment, it's like, oh, environment. But then really you get into the details and you think it's everything, and it's really, really hard to do all of them really well, compliant with different set of regulations within a particular jurisdiction, within a country. And if you're operating internationally, it really is like building 10 other companies. So, yeah, I just wanted to sort of stress that.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It is. It's actually a very, as with most of these things, it's a very complex area once you start digging into it, and you know you kind of have all these different specialisms, and that's what they were. They were all individual specialisms that were kind of banked under this theme of environmental management, and it was interesting because we initially thought, okay, well, we're going to build something that's going to be the sort of holistic environmental monitoring tool for construction. So you can plug in all your different sources of data. You can rely on Qflow, as it was at the time, to track all of these things and highlight risks. And that's going to help the general day-to-day management and reduce risk. And bear in mind, this is coming from a position where both myself and Brittany knew the industry, you know, pretty well by this point. We'd obviously worked in those roles and those jobs specifically, so we knew exactly what that sort of offering could do. But it was funny because when we did start down this channel, we found out exactly that. We kind of learned almost the hard way that actually each of these things were a specialism, you know, for a reason, and actually we couldn't just kind of gloss over the surface. And one of the best examples we had was we kind of latched onto this problem of material compliance pretty early on because one of our customers had a big challenge with timber certification. And so we thought, okay, we'll have a look at this. We'll see if we can get some photos and start tracking the documentation, which was our method at the time, to understand this and see what that did. And it quickly highlighted a few different risks very early on. Now that was great validation for us. But in the back of our minds, we were still interested in this wider environmental monitoring stuff. So we were still kind of going down this parallel path of looking at things like air quality, noise, vibration, which were all monitored by sensors. So it was a different data capture method.
Yeah.
And we thought the photos thing was fine, but it was kind of perhaps going to die a bit of a death because things were going to go digital. We could get data in different ways. And so we'll kind of continue looking at that, but we'll focus on this other area as well. And that was our first mistake because we started then building out some MVPs and some functionality for more holistic air quality monitoring. Worked with a product team who had some real challenges in this area and were intricately looking at that space and how they could better monitor air quality for health and safety reasons, but also environmental monitoring as well. And we started building out this MVP, and then we couldn't seem to get the traction that we wanted. We went to a sort of initial project team. We tested this out. We sort of didn't get any conversions, and we kept thinking to ourselves, well, there's got to be sort of other reasons around this. And I think it was a fundamental learning curve for us because we realized, or we had to realize pretty quickly after that point, we weren't hitting the right problem. We weren't really tackling any problem. We kind of thought that by bringing this together, the problem we were solving was disparate information. And whilst that was presenting challenges to the team, it wasn't enough to warrant buying a solution specifically to tackle that pain point. And as we started growing out the trials that we were running for the materials tracking at the time, we realized that was getting more and more interest. There was more and more space to delve into in this area. It wasn't just around timber certification. It was around all kinds of other certification for different materials. Then you've got waste. And then suddenly you have all this information. Suddenly you can understand the embodied carbon without having to do that manual tracking yourself. And they kind of opened up this whole other world. And so we decided, I think it was within the first 6 to 9 months of setting out this MVP, to scrap the concept of monitoring all these other things and being that more holistic tool and focusing very specifically on this core problem. And I remember it being quite slightly amusing at the time, not because we spent all this effort, this time kind of building out this MVP. I mean, that's the the point
Yeah.
of the MVP as well in some respects. But um, it was quite liberating on one hand to go down this pathway and sort of keep our focus very in line. But it taught us an awful lot around how easy it is. Again, even with that experience, we should, in theory, we should have known this
Mm.
from early on. We had been working on site, we'd done these roles, we knew the pain points, but we still made that mistake of hearing things and sort of believing the theory we've been telling ourselves and getting validation for that, and ignoring the stuff that wasn't validating that because it's slightly harder to see. So now when we think about our product discovery, we spend so much time and energy not just on getting the right conversations, but asking specifically the right questions, that we're not validating existing theories that we hold. We're actually constantly challenging ourselves to make sure that we're not going to fall down this pathway of building something because it kind of makes sense, but does it
Hmm.
make sense for the next 12 months or does it make sense for the next 12 years?
Wow, that is super important to know. I mean, what are your hypotheses? How do you validate or invalidate it? How do you constantly check yourself? Super interesting, Jade. And one point that I want to sort of dig deep into is you said um, you you weren't getting the initial traction that you wanted, that you planned for, and which is what led to looking some other ways and then finding something else. So when you set these targets, let's say you're building a product, MVP, prototype, whatever it is, would how do you know what good looks like? Because you're testing things out. It could be anything. It could be, hey, let me just get one client versus massive product market fit. So how do you know what's good enough?
Yeah, it's a big good question. I think I mean, to a certain extent, we've definitely gotten better at this over time. I'd say
Hmm.
at that point in our journey, which is, literally a year into when we first started, um, we didn't set that correctly. That's why it was very
Mm.
easy for us and a bunch of other companies as well that sort of fall into this trap of not defining again what the success metrics were, not just for us but for our customers we were working with as
Yes.
well. So we go to the end of the trial or the pilot thinking, yeah, like this is going really well, they're going to convert, it's going to be fine, and then we didn't convert, and then there was always another reason for it. And ultimately we part of it was because we hadn't done a good enough job at setting what success looked like for them so that we could
Mm.
demonstrate that and value that most importantly. And so now we're trying to be very clear with respect to not just our customers but ourselves in setting what we call waypoints. So we've got a very strict process of doing this now where, let's say we're looking at going into additional market, we won't do the sort of the typical strategy of raising a load of capital, spending money out in that area, testing it out, potentially not winning in that space, and sort of having to retreat again, which can cost you a small amount of money in the best case and huge amounts of money, time, effort, and people in the
Yeah.
worst case scenario. And so now we waypoint it. So we say, okay, well, if we secure these contracts at conversion of X within this time period,
Hmm.
then that will allow us to release this much additional capital to then invest in the next stage of growth and then sort of continue to grow in that fashion. So we see it as a much more sustainable way of growing the business pretty quickly, but doing it in a way which mitigates our risk of going down the wrong pathway and then severely damaging the business as a result.
Super. Thank you so much for that. I actually learned something new today, a new perspective. Weirdly, I haven't thought about that. So whenever I speak with the founders, I always ask about their North Star metrics, what good looks like. But then I think the key differentiator is what good looks like for your customers, for them to convert.
Mm.
It's a super, super good framework to think about. Thank you so much for sharing that. There are a few more areas that I want to sort of dive deep into. I mean, with the challenge, you also spoke about what you did to deal with it and then come out the other way. What I want to ask you is when you realized things weren't as good as they should be, I'm sure the founding team had a meeting. How was it? Was it, I mean, because it's very, very early, it's your time, it's your sweat, it's everything else that you have in your life that you put into the company. How do you sort of move away or keep away the emotional bearing of it and then and then be objective in a situation that's very, very sticky?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess more widely is in any kind of decision making within
Mhm.
business. Like, yeah, like I said, how do we separate the kind of emotion behind it and make sure it doesn't cloud judgment? I guess
Yeah.
in some respects. I mean, it's hard, right? And this is where I think having a solid co-founding team is so important with any business. And consider myself and us very fortunate between myself and Brittany that apart from having a good relationship where we can healthily challenge each other, we also both have very different perspectives on things. And I think this really, really helps, with any co-founding team, to make sure you balance your perspectives on things, and you can kind of take the good from from these different angles. But when it comes to, obviously in that case, when you're talking about putting emotion into it, building a business for anybody, like you said, it's a huge time investment. It's not just time, it's effort. It's,
Yeah.
you're making sacrifices that others may not make, in different kinds of roles, and that does carry a certain weight to it. But I think when it comes to taking the example from earlier around, pivoting and changing direction, I think in some respects you've got to, we always see it as ripping the band-aid off with these things.
Oh,
It
yeah.
might feel painful at first because you spend, 6 months in the grand scheme of things feels like a lifetime, especially when you've only been running the business for about 6 months by that point anyway. But at the same time, it is also a short period compared to what it otherwise could have been. And so making that decision then, and making it early enough, was always going to be more important for the long term than continuing on, because we felt like it was still the right thing to do. And it also takes, you have to detach from your ego at that point in time, right? So it's really tricky, I think, for any individual to kind of fall into this trap of, and it's a subconscious thing, like, oh, I've invested so much time there, I have made the decision to do this thing, or we have made the decision to do this thing, therefore if it's not right, we have failed. Like, that is a very easy mental pathway to follow. And you also have to just be able to take a step back and actually evaluate and think about it from yourself and say, well, okay, we've gone down this pathway, it hasn't worked. It isn't a failing personally, it's a failing for a bunch of other reasons, which you can understand and learn from. And then you can make the better decision to move down this different pathway. And as soon as you do that, you feel quite liberated. But you have to have that, almost that pain point of salt in the wound at first, to kind of then come through the other side. But I think, again, it depends why you're building a business. For myself, and for my co-founder, it has always been a case of, we're doing this to make the industry more sustainable. We're doing this for a purpose. And so it's not about us. It's not about our wants. It's not about the thing that we're doing day to day. We don't really mind how we get there. It's just a case of getting to that end goal. And so therefore it allows you to take the emotion out of it ever so slightly, or at least the edge, because you're making the decision for those reasons and not for just personal gain.
Super. I mean, yes, it's a tough one. Yeah, it's just a tough one. It needs a lot of emotional maturity, or maybe a good board, good friends and family, and a good founding team that is good at taking decisions and owning up to those decisions, whether it's good or bad. We never know. Okay. Another area that I want to ask you is, you have a good team now. When it comes to hiring, and for me, when I look at hiring, especially at the pre-seed seed stage, it's always, okay, that's the money, that's going to be the biggest cost for the company. How do you ensure that the first few team members that you hire, which becomes a key core team, these are the right hires? Do you have an external advisor, consultant? How do you make these decisions? And have you ever made mistakes? And have to fire people? How do you navigate the people bit of running a company?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important area, like you say. I mean, the majority of our business costs and input is very much in the team, right? Like, the team is the business. I think early on, first of all, I would say it's always a leap of faith with somebody coming into the team. Doesn't matter what role or what stage you're at. Like, there's only a certain amount you can understand about one another before you both, in this sense, commit to going on this journey. And that, we always thought of recruitment, again, very early stages, and still do now, like, it is always a core decision and an important decision for both parties, both the person coming in and deciding to give up their time to join this journey and to join this environment, and for us to have faith that this person's going to be a fantastic member in the team. I mean, very early on, we had some advisors that were helping us with some of the key roles, particularly the technical roles, because you've got to bear in mind that both me and my co-founder Britt are sort of non-technical in the sort of software sense when we started. So that was a big blind spot for us. We could assess an individual and assess their value alignment and things like this, but we didn't have the experience ourselves to know the competencies associated with software engineering or data science and that sort of thing. So we did have some advisors with us early on, but to be honest, the biggest influencing conversations that we had with individuals was always in those like more value aligned conversations. So understanding the history of those individuals, what they've been through. And for more senior roles now, we change our process over time, we evolve it, we learn more as we go. And that's because there have been mistakes. I think any founder at this stage,
There ought to be. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
I think would be lying in terms of saying that they hadn't made mistakes over time. And you obviously correct those mistakes and you learn from them. But one of the things we try to mitigate, of course, your kind of best strategy to take is to make sure that you spend the right amount of time and due diligence up front with that individual before they join the team. And some of the techniques that we've now used and learned from over time have been to really understand the background history and that person's story, particularly for the more senior roles over time, because actually by that point in time, you can be fairly confident in their technical competencies or their sort of their baseline experiences. It's really about the individual and the fit at this stage. And so, how has that person made decisions previously? Why have they moved between these different kinds of roles? Like what got them interested in this area and what is making them stick to this area? And what are they looking for next? It's less about what we're looking for. It's almost more about what they are, because once you understand that, you can understand whether there's alignment there. And that's been a really important part of our journey, and especially, like I said, in some of the more involved roles within the business.
Super. Another question. So both you and Britt, your co-founder, both of you are non-technical co-founders, and you've managed to build a beautiful, great business. But has this ever come as a challenge or a flag when you were raising money? Also, from my experience, also what YC says, as in the Y Combinator Accelerator, they always like to invest in technical co-founders, technical founders. So was it a challenge for you when you were raising? If it was, how did you sort of then mitigate that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so funny enough, you mentioned about Y Combinator. So we went through Entrepreneur First, EF,
Okay.
on there. I think it was a 10th cohort in London at the time. And it was an interesting one because anybody who's familiar with EF, they have a really interesting model, of course. And the sort of the more typical approach is for, first of all, founders who don't know each other. Interestingly, me and Britt came into EF as an existing co-founding pair, but also you tend to have the sort of the domain expert and then the more technical or deeply technical expert as well. So you've got that sort of CEO, CTO kind of pairing. We never really had that, and it certainly was a question, both with Entrepreneur First as an organization, but also with VCs when we started to raise our seed round off the back of that in 2019. It was never a fundamental blocker for us though, and I think that's the sort of key difference there, because we were able to demonstrate that the founding relationship between myself and Britt was very strong. We had different perspectives, and whilst we had overlaps in terms of our experience in the sector, we had very different perspectives and sort of deeper levels of experience in those specific domains within the space. And by that point in time, we had also demonstrated enough traction with early customers and pilots and some conversions to demonstrate that this problem that we were talking about was really a problem and that the solution we'd come up with worked. And so you put all these things together and it kind of mitigates that slightly background risk of, oh, well, this person or these people aren't technical, therefore how can they build this thing? Well, we'd already demonstrated enough by that point in time to override that concern. And that's with any concerns that VCs have about any teams. As long as you can find a way to overcome that with evidence, you don't have, we never really spent copious amounts of time describing why it was important, why it wasn't important, neither one of us technical, because as soon as you say you've got this traction and you built X, Y, Z so far, it becomes a non-problem. And that was our way of tackling that.
Absolutely. So that's the right way to go about it. It's always about what proof do you have? What proof points do you have? Have you ticked off on certain milestones? Just that proof is good enough for VCs to then get in, or any investor to then go in. Fantastic. Okay, so shifting gears here and moving into the last bit of the conversation, which is about productivity tools and productivity hacks. Do you have a tool or a framework or a mental model that keeps you sane running this business? Yeah.
I mean, do you mean like actual like software products and things that we use?
Yes. For example, some of the guests have told us about, I love to get in box zero because that removes all my anxiety. So they use X, Y, and Z. And one person said, I I love to arrange my day a certain way so that I know I'm productive by the end of the day. So it could be any of that.
Mhm. Yeah, got you. I mean, most of my team will know this as well. I bash on about there are two tools that seem to run most of my days at the moment, and
Hmm.
that'll be Trello and Notion.
Hmm.
So I also run by sort of the sort of zero inbox rule as well.
Hmm.
If I sometimes when you see or if I see any inboxes that are going over like hundreds, thousands of unread
Wow.
emails, it just gives me just deep anxiety. I can't
Yeah.
I can't handle that.
Hmm.
I think it's for me, the reason I say sort of Trello Notion run my life is because for me, if something doesn't go onto my Trello board instantly, it will be forgotten. I'm not run for writing like physical notes. I know a lot of people
Hmm.
still like the tactile nature
Hmm.
of that.
Hmm.
Everything for me is online because I can then, if I'm on the move, I can do it on my phone, I can do it on my
Yeah.
laptop or whatever else. And
Hmm.
my handwriting is also appalling. So at least I can read it and understand these things I'm
Hmm.
putting onto Trello. But I time box everything. So I make sure that everything that I'm timing is realistic and I
Hmm.
can work through it as a big or a small
Hmm.
task.
Hmm.
I don't manage my calendar in a way that allows me to be more productive at certain points because it's so sporadic with the nature of meetings and
Yeah.
calls and travel.
Hmm.
It will just fall down too quickly. But Notion is also something that we use very widely across the business now, and it houses most of the information that we use and share and work from in a much more efficient way than we were doing beforehand, which is just through a series of different kind of hosted
Tools. Yeah.
documents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So those are the main things for me.
Super. Have you seen an improvement in the way you work, as in, oh, I'm able to focus more, I have more chunks of time to do deep work? Is it just, I mean, so do you look at these tools as, oh, I've recorded everything here, everything is written down, or is it, oh, this is massively improving how much stuff I get done in a day? Which one of this is it for you?
I think it's kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really necessarily the act of having information kind of
Mm-hmm.
written down or stored down.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I said, the outcome is that you do those things and you do
Mm-hmm.
them in the most efficient way possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's why for me Trello was an important tool in particular because it's less so about the information within there; it's more so about the timing of doing certain
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things I've had to learn, I'd say more recently actually, or it's kind of one of those constant things that you learn over time. But it's very easy to for anybody to spend a lot of time on small stuff and busy stuff rather than the
Yes.
fundamental
Yeah.
strategic pieces that you
Yeah.
need. And for me, I need a lot of, again, if you've got a calendar or a diary where you've got everything packed and stacked up, I might have like the odd half hour, 15 minutes here or there, but it's very rare that I get sort of very significant chunks
Mm-hmm.
of time
Mm-hmm.
spent just in my own headspace. And so one thing I've managed to do over time is to kind of start like formalizing blocking out and sticking to the fact that I've blocked out certain time, which is the hardest bit, to make sure that I have the headspace to do something that which might, as a task, might only take you an hour, but sometimes you need the headspace around it to actually allow yourself the brain capacity to think around some of these challenges, these decisions that you need to make. And that's actually the more important part, is like not necessarily the output and the time you're spending doing something, but the time you're spending thinking, which is I think I've probably learned the hard way over the years.
All right. So thank you so much, Jade, for spending your time with me. Amazing, fantastic conversation. Actually, you know what? I'd like to do another episode with you and really go around into a few other very different topics, because I think you have that expertise, and I want to get into the go to market bit, and also get into how does one assume a leadership position, because you're not born leaders. We learn to get into that role. So these would be the two topics that I want to explore. So you're definitely coming again on the Close Call show. So first
That's
up,
good.
thank you so much again for being in today. I wish you all the best for creating a super huge company with Qualis Flow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate spending the time. So thank you.